Well, one hallmark of Mussolini's efforts in the 1920s and 1930s and 1940s, for that matter, was competition with the Vatican. And this played out in all sorts of different ways, both explicitly and implicitly. And let's look at just a few instances. Well, one focus of competition was the balustrade of St. Peter's, where the popes would appear to make their most important benedictions and pronouncements. Well, in 1929, Mussolini, for his part, moved his office from Palazzo Chigi in the Piazza Colonna to the Palazzo Venezia, on the piazza, of course, adjacent to the national altar of the fatherland, the Vittorio Emanuele II monument, a symbol of Italian unity and since 1921, the resting place of Italy's unknown soldier. And the balcony of Palazzo Venezia that faced onto the piazza provided Mussolini with, in fact, a very high-profile podium, and he used this to harangue crowds who filled this vast ready-made space of Piazza Venezia, forming these rallies that were to become an icon for Mussolini's Rome. In fact, Mussolini declared this to be the new center of Rome, and in fact, it helped that the most sacred space of the nation, of the new Italian nation, was just adjacent. And the combination of the Palazzo Venezia and having the altar of the fatherland there made this the heart of the new fascist Italy. And in this sense, he was, in fact, pulling the locus of power away from the Campidoglio, on the one hand, away from the Vatican, and, in fact, putting Piazza Venezia right at the center. And it so happens that with some work, the most major routes of the new city would all lead to Piazza Venezia. And in fact, it's amazing to see how he was able to exert the political will to clear-cut the area between Piazza Venezia and the area of the Colosseum to form his new Via del Impero for the year 1932. Well, speaking of Via del Impero, it seems that really following the Decennale of 1932 and the very successful exhibit of the Fascist Revolution that ran, in fact, a full 2 years, Mussolini sponsored a contest for the design of a grand new party building that would sit precisely on the Via del Impero, right near the Colosseum and across from the Basilica of Maxentius. This building, which was going to be massive and in fact completely out of scale for the surroundings, this was to replace the previous National Fascist Party headquarters on the Corso Vittorio Emanuele in something known as the Palazzo Vidoni, right next to the Church of San Andrea della Valle. Well, the contest, or architectural competition rather, attracted more than 100 entries, and the committee to evaluate the projects included the governor of Rome, Prince Francesco Boncompagni Ludovisi, and also a team of architects that included Marcello Piacentini. Piacentini is of extreme importance in this period, but also some political hacks, such as the Secretary General of the party, Achille Stracci. Well, there were enormous divisions because this was going to be the real symbol of proper fascist style. Nothing could be more fascist than the headquarters of the fascist National Party. And so, in fact, the competition went nowhere. In 1937, however, Mussolini revived the project, and he suggested a new site on a recently widened and redesigned Viale Aventino, which was behind a spectacular new post office by the architect Adalberto Libera that faced the Via Marmorata. However, the task of putting such a grandiose structure in the historic center of Rome proved to be a daunting task. So a final decision was made in 1938 to put the Fascist Party headquarters at a site in the Foro Mussolini. And there was a design, in fact, by a team that included Enrico Del Debbio, who was the protege of Renato Ricci, and in fact was responsible for the original design of the Foro Mussolini. Also involved in this team was Vittorio Morpurgo, who we saw had designed the glass enclosure for the Arapacis. Well, this building was going to be 540,000 square meters in volume, and basically was going to provide offices for the entire hierarchy of the Fascist National Party, which is saying a lot, including a 2-story space for the Duce. And the building was to be 200 meters long and faced a piazza, as we're going to see, that was meant to be able to hold upwards of 400,000 people. Well, the building, in fact, was completed, but only after the war. Today it's known as the Palazzo Farnesina. It's long been the home of Italy's foreign ministry, well, long, since 1958, and in fact is the largest building in Italy. However, there was a certain logic to putting the Palazzo del Littorio, the seat of the Fascist National Party, in the Foro Mussolini. Renato Ricci himself, the leader of the Balilla, said when this was announced, he says this was going to be a center of fascist life. It was its natural site and also a predestined one. I'm paraphrasing here. Integral to the plan was to have a permanent exhibit of the fascist revolution in this building. Now, sometimes Mussolini and his regime genuinely encroached on the Vatican. I mean, there was a construction of on a very unpromising site of the Casa dei Mutilati, which was in fact not just designed for those wounded in war, those injured in World War I, but it was actually completely designed and built by those wounded in war. Also, there was the clearing of and this was very near Castle San Angelo, and in fact the area of the Castle San Angelo itself was cleared to form a park, dedicated in 1934. But really the most incredible encroachment on the Vatican was the building of the Via della Conciliazione itself. But I want to turn to 2 case studies, one early and one late, and each was an attempt to create, as unlikely as it sounds, a new urban center for Rome. Well, the most ambitious new project that the regime announced in its earlier years was, in fact, the Foro Mussolini. This was a new site that was going to be not just a sports complex, but it was going to be a center for ideological education and, in a larger sense, form a new gateway to the city from the north. It was on the same side of the river, the western side of the Tiber, as the Vatican, and in fact was just a short 2 kilometers walk north. And the project was pretty much unveiled in 1927, and in fact would take some time to, certainly a full decade to be fully realized. But this was going to be a new, modern city of sport that was going to have as its themes, in addition to physical fitness, youth in general. And Enrico Del Debbio received the commission to design and develop this space. And in fact, as we've seen, the whole notion was by several means to develop a new generation of Italians as part of the fascist revolution. And as such, however, as a center for physical culture, it was part of a much larger network, as we've seen. We've seen the close to 900 Balilla houses that Renato Ricci set up throughout Italy. Well, the grand opening, so to speak, of the Foro Mussolini was 1932, when the great marble obelisk that was dedicated to the Duce, a gift of the Opera Nazionale Balilla, when this was unveiled. And this, in fact, was a symbol, this modern obelisk was a symbol of how determined Mussolini was to make the city over again in his image. But also there was direct competition with the Vatican, not just the physical site itself, but it was clear almost to all how the Foro Mussolini was meant to establish fascism as a new kind of secular religion. And in fact, the Foro Mussolini became, or at least was intended to become, an ideological symbol of the new Rome. Well, the technical design and the functional innovations of the Foro Mussolini are astonishing even today. One can single out just almost at random the enormous volumes, interior volumes of the buildings on the site, with windows, enormous windows that are oriented to receive maximum air and sun. In fact, the whole situation of the site in a incredibly evocative setting on the slopes of Monte Mario. And the interior of these buildings, one sees almost a positive exaltation of the use of toilets, showers, soap, water, swimming pools, and the like. This was meant to send out a strong message as well about Italy's modernity in this regard. Very difficult to study this site because there's multiple authorities that are responsible for the buildings and grounds. They include the Italian National Olympic Committee, CONI, C-O-N-I, also the National Broadcasting Network, RAI. There's a branch, not a branch, but there's the University of Rome number 4 is located, one of the premier sports universities in the world, and as I've said, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and many others as well. Also, this site is precarious. There's a preservation mandate because of in the Stadio Olimpico today, there's, at least as I am speaking now, Rome's 2 main soccer teams play there, Lazio and AS Roma, and so every Sunday at 3 p.m., or actually the build-up to the 3 p.m. Kickoff, there are 90,000 feet that go over the delicate fascist era mosaics, and in graffiti is endemic. It's an endemic problem at this site. Well, one can go on, but let's take a look at some of the high points that make this site so distinctive. So here I am on the site of the Stadio dei Marmi.
Where I'm standing on a very hot August day is in what's today known as the Foro Italico, but it was originally set up as the Foro Mussolini in 1928. There were 2 architects whose names are associated with this complex in particular. Ernesto Del Debbio, who is responsible for this magnificent Stadio dei Marmi, the Stadium of the Marble Statues, and then, starting in 1933, Luigi Moretti, the Italian architect who built the Watergate complex in Washington, D.C. The notion was to set up a fascist city of sport that would be a new northern entrance to the city of Rome, about 2 kilometers north of Vatican City. Here on the slopes of Monte Mario, you're supposed to see only 4 colors. The red, Pompeian red of the buildings, the blue of the sky, the green of the hills behind you, and then the glaring white of marble. One of the most interesting things is this was also meant to be set up, as improbable as it sounds, as a rival to Vatican City itself and to St. Peter's Square. There was to be a new St. Peter's, so to speak, but this was to be a church of sport. The focal point, necessarily, of this entire complex was planned to be a 120-meter statue of Mussolini. Well, actually a fascism personified by someone who looked distinctly like Mussolini in loincloth, giving the fascist salute with his right arm. The place where it was to be positioned was behind this building here. It's today the Italian Foreign Ministry, but it was set up as the Fascist Party headquarters. It remains the largest building in Italy with 1,800 rooms. They started the casting of this enormous statue. However, it was never completed. They cast the face and they cast one of the feet. The toe itself stood 8 feet high. If Mussolini's plans to complete this fascist city of sport, complete with the 120-meter statue of the spirit of fascism, had ever been completed, well, this would have towered over the northern entrance to the city of Rome and been visible pretty much from any point in the city itself, in direct competition with the Vatican, because that was the whole notion of how this complex was to be. It was to be a new St. Peter's, but a St. Peter's of sport.
Well, the name is practically synonymous with the Foro Mussolini as that of Renato Ricci, who was, in fact, and this is a crucial fact, he was born in Carrara, the center for marble working in Italy. And he, at a young age, he became head of the Opera Nazionale Balila movement really before he was age 30. And we've talked about how inspired he was by all sorts of different models, which range from Robert Baden-Powell's scouting organization in Britain to the residential universities, Harvard and Princeton in the United States, and also Bauhaus artists and architects in Germany. And Ricci was an accomplished aviator and would fly his own plane to Germany to meet with them. Well, he entered Mussolini's government in 1929 as a secretary for youth physical education. I mean, this was something that really came with his presidency of the national Balila movement. One thing that Ricci never did was add the adjective fascist to the name of his organization, the Balila, and in fact, this was seems to have irritated Mussolini to no end, because in 1937, he was replaced by the ideologue, or even more extreme ideologue, I should say. These folks are all ideologues, but basically Achille Strachey. And Achille Strachey was employed to reorganize the Opera Nazionale Balila closer along the lines of the Hitler Youth in Germany, the Hitler Jugend. However, he was never able to inspire a nationwide enthusiasm for this youth group on the same level that Ricci was, or certainly was not able to establish it at the same level where the youth group stood in Nazi Germany. The story of Strachey's subsequent career is a long one, but I'll just bring it to the final chapter. On the 29th of April 1945, he was recognized and captured by anti-fascist Italian partisans, and there was a summary trial, and he was sentenced to death, and he was taken to Piazzale Loreto in Milan, shown the body of Mussolini, who had been beaten and shot, and Strachey saluted the body just before he himself was shot, and his body was subsequently strung up next to Mussolini's and Claretta Petacci's and a few other hardliners. Del Debbio, Enrico Del Debbio, was a slightly older contemporary of Renato Ricci. He too was born at Carrara. And, however, he was replaced after 6 years of working at the Forum Mussolini by a very talented Italian architect, perhaps one of the greatest, if not the greatest of the 20th century, Luigi Moretti. And in fact, the regulatory plan for the Forum Mussolini was placed in Moretti's hands, displacing Del Debbio in 1933. And Moretti took over, in taking over the design of the regulatory plan of Forum Mussolini, he went on to create some of the most distinctive buildings that 20th century Italy, or in fact the world, had ever seen, including the Casa della Armi, an academy of fencing, which formed the southern boundary of the Forum Mussolini, and also a remarkable gymnasium that he created for Mussolini. And both these structures date to 1936. And he was also the major planner of what would be, I would call, the most monumental section of the Forum Mussolini. This was a piazzale that brought together, in fact united and made coherent, the space between the obelisk, which had been set up in 1932, and also a companion sphere. Let's take a look at the sphere, in fact, in person.
Well, the symbolic center of the Forum Mussolini is the Viale dell'Impero, built between 1932 and 1937, and in its final form, it commemorates Italy's acquisition of its empire by its conquest of Ethiopia. I'm standing on what must be the world's largest mosaic, and in the distance is the center of the entire enterprise, this obelisk, 770 tons when standing on its base, that was quarried, the largest piece of marble that has ever been quarried in the Italian Alps, and then brought through a 5-year process to this site. Finally set up in 1932 to celebrate the 10th anniversary of introduction of fascism. To bring this obelisk into place was an enormous feat, and the way that Mussolini and his engineers conceived it was in precise competition with the Vatican obelisk that was erected by Fontana in 1586. Exactly the same methods were used. In fact, even elements of this obelisk, the side, the lateral pieces, were dragged ceremoniously through, and gratuitously, I may add, through Bernini's piazza in front of St. Peter's. The message is clear: direct competition with St. Peter's Square, direct competition with the Vatican. This is the new Vatican, the fascist Vatican. It is Mussolini's new entrance to the city and a fascist city of sport. Oddly enough, the ex-Foro Mussolini was also the principal site of the 1960 Rome Olympic Games. And what is known today as the Stadio Olimpico was the center for the opening ceremony, the closing ceremony, the decathlon, and many of the major events. There were all sorts of problems, political and otherwise, in having Olympics at the center of Mussolini's fascist city of sport. And it's very interesting how the organizers skirted it. What they did was they marshaled against the fascist legacy here 2,800 years of Roman history and made it this seem like a footnote to a footnote. But there was obviously a bit of embarrassment about having this as the site. For the entrance to the Stadio Olimpico, for the opening ceremonies, they devised a route that skirted the obelisk. And also when you take a look at the official Olympic film, The Great Olympiad, there is not a single shot of Mussolini's obelisk. When I first came to Rome in the 1980s, the biggest question I had is, why does this all still exist? Why is this enormous monument to fascism, the most strident monument of fascism that came from that era, from that regime, why is it still standing? Why is there an obelisk that says Mussolini Dux on it? Well, the answer is that in 1944, after the liberation of Rome and the Allied troops entered, this was turned into an army rest camp, the 5th Army Rest Camp for British, French, and especially American soldiers. And the Americans decided deliberately not to pull down the obelisk or the statues or pull up these mosaics or the like. In fact, what they did is they used it as a backdrop for maximum irony. One of the first things they did was to stage a beauty pageant here on the Viale dell'Impero.